I never thought getting a tattoo could mess with my head this much, or my heart. But there I was, sitting on that squeaky leather chair, my arms stretched out, waiting for the buzz of the needle that would finally cover up a mistake I made 5 years ago. I'd been to a handful of tattoo shops before, but this place was different. It had that weird mix of grungy and cozy, like someone tried to make a dive bar feel like a living room. And then there was him, my tattoo artist, the guy whose name I still didn't know after 30 minutes of awkward small talk. He was this tall, scruffy-haired dude with a sleeve of tattoos that looked like a storybook across his skin. His hands were steady as hell as he prepared the ink, and there was this calm confidence about him that made me trust him instantly, even though I was the type who normally overthinks everything. I remember thinking, okay, this guy's got it together, which was more than I could say about myself. The moment he started, I felt that familiar sting. But it wasn't just the pain. There was something about the way his hands moved, careful but sure, gentle but deliberate, that made my skin tingle in a way I hadn't expected. I caught myself watching him more than the tattoo itself, noticing the little things, the way his fingers flexed, how he'd pause just to check the stencil placement again, how his brown eyes, usually focused, flicked up to mine like he was waiting for permission to keep going. We had barely exchanged any words, which felt weird because normally I'm pretty chatty when I'm nervous. But with him, silence felt comfortable, like we didn't need to fill the space with small talk. I told myself it was just the vibe of the shop, the music humming low in the background, the smell of ink and antiseptic mixing. But then, when he reached over to adjust my arm, his touch lingered a second too long. Just a brush, but enough to make my chest tighten and my mind scramble. I'm not the type to get butterflies over a stranger, especially not at a tattoo shop where the focus is supposed to be on the art, not the artist. But there was this undercurrent between us that I couldn't shake. Maybe it was the way he smiled when I winced at the needle, or how he made a joke about me being a wimp that was half teasing, half like he wanted me to laugh to calm down. By the time he finished, I barely recognized the new design inked onto my skin. Bold, clean lines that covered up the shaky amateur tattoo I'd gotten in college. More than that, though, I realized I was suddenly too aware of his presence beside me, the heat from his body just inches away, the way his casual, all done sounded like he meant more than the tattoo. I was supposed to get out of there, pay, say thanks, and never see him again. But when he asked if I wanted to grab a coffee, something inside me said yes. And right then, with the shop closing down around us and the sun dipping low outside, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Coffee was never on my plan for that evening. I mean, I'd gone in just to fix a dumb mistake on my arm, not to start what might be a whole new chapter of my life. But when he asked, that casual, "You want to grab a coffee or something?" didn't feel like a throwaway line. It felt like an invitation to, I don't know, something. Something more than just ink and needles. We walked out of the shop together, the late spring air cool but not cold, streets quiet as most people had already settled in for the night. The city lights flickered on, casting this soft glow that made everything look kind of cinematic, like we were part of a movie scene I hadn't auditioned for. He pulled his jacket tighter around him and tilted his head toward this little cafe a few blocks away. "It's not much, but they make a mean espresso," he said with a grin that made my stomach do an unhelpful little flip. I agreed, though I felt like I was operating on autopilot. My brain kept throwing me these weird questions. What's his name? Why did I feel like I'd known him forever? Was I imagining that tiny spark whenever our eyes met? I was usually the guy who kept his feelings locked down tight, no room for uncertainty or surprises. But with him, it was like there was a crack in the wall I'd built around myself. Inside the cafe, the smell of roasted beans hit me, warm and grounding. We found a corner table, the kind tucked away enough that you could have a real conversation without shouting. He ordered a black coffee, me a latte, and then suddenly we were just talking. Not about tattoos or art, but about the usual stuff. Music, bad movies, stupid things we'd done in our 20s. He told me about his little apartment in the neighborhood, his dog, the dream of opening his own studio one day. His voice was easy to listen to. There was this calm sincerity in it, like he wasn't trying to impress me or hide behind a persona, just himself. And somehow that made me want to open up too, even though I was usually the guy who held everything in. "So what made you decide to cover up that old tattoo?" he asked, tilting his head with genuine curiosity. I hesitated before answering, then shrugged. Bad decision in college. Long story. It was one of those things you get when you're dumb and impulsive. Figured it was time to fix it. He nodded like he got it. "Yeah, I've seen plenty of clients come in for that same reason." There was a pause, and I caught him watching me in that way that made my pulse quicken. "What about you? Ever thought about getting a tattoo that means something?" I laughed, a bit nervously. "I'm not sure. I've always been a bit hesitant about putting something permanent on my skin. But maybe it's time." He smiled, just a small, knowing smile. "Maybe next time you let me design it." At that, I felt my cheeks flush. It wasn't just the idea of him designing something for me, but the way his gaze held mine. Like there was more to that invitation than just ink. We finished our coffees, and when we stepped back out into the night, the city felt different. Like it had shifted just for us. We walked side by side, no rush to say goodbye. When we reached the corner where he'd go one way and I'd the other, he stopped. "Hey," he said, hesitating a bit. "I'm Liam, by the way." "My name," I said, smiling. "Maybe I'll see you around? Or, maybe you should come by the shop sometime. For a touch-up, or just to say hi." I nodded, heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with caffeine. "Yeah, I'd like that." I watched him walk away, the fading light catching the tattoo ink on his forearm, wondering how a simple tattoo appointment had turned into something that felt like the start of something I didn't want to end. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to those steady hands, the way they'd touched my arm, the way he'd looked at me like I mattered. And for once, I didn't want to push those feelings away. Instead, I found myself hoping this was just the beginning. I kept thinking about Liam all the next few days, which was weird because I usually don't replay moments like that in my head. But there was something about him that stuck. Maybe it was the way he made me feel seen without even trying, or the way his hands moved so confidently across my skin, but also with care. It wasn't just a tattoo. It felt like something more. So when I finally texted him, yeah, I'm one of those guys who actually texts first, I was surprised at how quickly he responded. He didn't just give me the usual polite answer. He asked how the tattoo was healing, if I was happy with it. And just like that, our conversation started to feel less like a casual exchange and more like two people slowly figuring each other out. A couple of days later, I found myself back at the shop, not for a tattoo this time, but just because I wanted to see him again. It felt a little ridiculous typing, just dropping by, into a message, but he told me the shop was open late that night, so I showed up after work. Walking in, the familiar hum of the place settled over me. The walls were lined with art, some done by Liam, some by other artists, and there was that same mix of smell, leather, and ink in the air. Liam looked up when I came in, and his smile was like a warm welcome. "Back so soon?" he teased, wiping his hands on a rag. "Couldn't stay away," I joked back, feeling a bit awkward but also excited. He motioned me over to the counter, and we ended up sitting on those high stools they had near the front window. We talked about everything and nothing. His latest tattoo designs, my work, which honestly sounded boring compared to his, music we both liked, and the weird little things that make life interesting. At one point, he leaned forward, resting his forearms on the counter, and I caught a glimpse of one of his tattoos up close, a delicate line drawing of a bird in flight. "That one means freedom," he said softly. "Got it after a rough patch in my life." I nodded, surprised by how much I wanted to understand the stories behind his ink. We were sharing these little pieces of ourselves without even realizing it. Later, when the shop started winding down, Liam asked if I wanted to grab a drink somewhere nearby. It felt like the next natural step, and I said yes without hesitation. We ended up at this low-key bar a few blocks away, the kind with dim lighting and a jukebox in the corner playing old rock songs. Sitting across from him, I felt that same flutter in my chest, like I was on the edge of something new but not sure where it would go. "Do you ever feel like life's just a series of moments you don't expect?" he said suddenly, swirling his drink. "All the time," I admitted. "Like, you think you have a plan and then something happens that throws everything off." He smiled, this half smile that was both playful and serious. "Yeah, like meeting someone who changes the way you see everything." I looked at him, feeling like my heart was about to jump out of my chest. Maybe? For a while, we just sat there, soaking in the quiet buzz of the bar, the occasional clink of glasses, and the soft hum of the music. Then Liam reached across the table and brushed my hand with his fingers. The touch was light, but it sent a shock through me, familiar and electric all at once. "I'm glad you came back," he said quietly. "I was hoping you would." I smiled, the kind that feels like it comes from the inside, the kind you don't fake. "Me too." That night ended with a slow walk back to the tattoo shop, the city streets almost deserted, and the kind of silence between us that didn't need words. When we reached the door, Liam hesitated before stepping closer. "Can I see you again?" he asked, voice low. I nodded. "Definitely." As he disappeared inside, I realized that getting a tattoo had been just the start. Liam's hands might have drawn the ink on my skin, but it was the rest of him. The way he looked at me, the way he made space for me, that was leaving the real mark. And for once, I was ready to follow wherever that might lead. After that night, things started to shift in a way I hadn't really expected. We kept texting, sometimes about silly stuff, sometimes about deeper things, and every message felt like a thread slowly pulling us closer. It wasn't some whirlwind romance where everything happens at once. It was more like this easy, persistent tug that made me look forward to hearing from him, to seeing him, to figuring out who this guy really was. A few days later, Liam invited me over to his place. I wasn't sure what to expect. Part of me thought it'd be like hanging out at a friend's apartment, the other part secretly hoping for something more. When I showed up, the door was answering the ring almost immediately, and he looked even more relaxed than he did at the shop. Hair a little messier, a worn hoodie, that calm smile that somehow made me feel like I belonged. His apartment was small but cozy, filled with books, sketch pads, and a bunch of plants that I assumed he'd somehow managed to keep alive. There was a window seat with a pile of cushions, a record player softly spinning some indie tunes, and a faint smell of coffee and something woodsy. We sat down with mugs of tea. He didn't drink much coffee after a certain hour, he said, and talked for hours. We shared stories I usually wouldn't tell anyone, about family, mistakes, dreams. Liam had this way of listening that made me feel like my words mattered, like I wasn't just background noise. At one point, he stood up and grabbed his sketch pad from the couch, flipping it open to show me some designs he'd been working on, animals, abstract shapes, a few pieces inspired by mythology. I was impressed, not just by the art, but by how passionately he described each one, what they meant to him. "Want me to design your next tattoo?" he asked, eyes glinting with that familiar mix of mischief and sincerity. I smiled, suddenly feeling both nervous and excited. "I think I'd like that." As the night wore on, it felt like time slowed down. We ended up sitting side by side on the window seat, the city lights twinkling below. Liam's arm brushed against mine, and I didn't pull away. Instead, I turned to look at him, catching the way his eyes searched mine, like he was waiting for permission. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, voice low and a little unsure. I nodded, heart thudding so loud I thought he'd hear it. When his lips met mine, it was soft and warm, like coming home after a long time away. His hands slid up to cup my face, and I felt a spark that was both new and familiar. From that moment, everything changed. We started spending more time together. Some nights at his place, some at mine. Sometimes just wandering the city streets, talking about everything and nothing. The more I got to know him, the more I realized how rare it was to find someone who saw you, really saw you, and didn't try to fix or change you but just accepted you. Of course, it wasn't all perfect. There were moments of uncertainty, of vulnerability, when I'd catch myself holding back because I was scared of what it all meant. Liam had his own stuff too. Past relationships that left scars, the pressure of building a career in a tough industry, the fear of opening up fully, but we navigated it together, one conversation at a time. He had this way of grounding me, reminding me that it was okay to be messy, to be uncertain. And honestly, I didn't care if it was cliché. I was falling for him. One evening, maybe a month after that first coffee, we were lying on his couch, the city humming outside the window. He traced patterns on my arm where the new tattoo was still fresh, fingers light and careful. You know, he said, "Your skin is kind of a canvas, but it's more than that. It's where stories live, and I want to keep adding to yours." I looked at him, that familiar warmth spreading in my chest. "I'm ready for the next chapter," I said. He smiled, leaning in to kiss me again, softer this time, like a promise. At that moment, I realized something. Sometimes, the best tattoos aren't the ones inked on your skin. They're the ones that leave a mark on your heart. And Liam's hands, those steady, sure hands, were the start of something I never saw coming, but I never wanted to let go of. After that night on his couch, things between Liam and me settled into a rhythm I didn't want to disrupt. We fell into this easy, comfortable closeness, like the kind you find after you've known someone for years, not just weeks. But of course, real life has a way of reminding you that nothing is ever that simple. About 2 weeks later, Liam called me before my shift at work. His voice sounded serious, which was different from the usual easygoing tone I'd grown used to. "Hey, you got a minute?" he asked. I was already halfway out the door, but I stopped and leaned against the wall. "Yeah, what's up?" There was a pause, like he was trying to figure out how to say something. I've been offered an opportunity, maybe to open my own studio. It's a big step, and, well, it's scary. I could hear the weight behind his words. I knew how much tattooing meant to him, but the idea of opening a place, being responsible for everything, that was huge. "That's amazing," I said honestly. "But scary, yeah, I get that." "Yeah, and there's more. It might mean relocating, or at least being pulled away from here for a while." His voice dropped almost to a whisper. "I don't know what that means for us." I felt my stomach twist. I hadn't been thinking about the future beyond the next date or the next time we'd hang out. But suddenly, the possibility of him leaving made everything feel fragile. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, more quickly than I meant to. "I want us, to work. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out." He sighed, and I could tell he wasn't convinced. "I hope so. It's just, I don't want to mess this up." "It's not a mess," I said, reaching for my phone to text him a smiley face, but then I stopped and looked up at the ceiling instead. "It's new. It's real. And that means it's worth fighting for." We talked a little longer, but the conversation left this quiet tension between us. I realized that love, at least for me, wasn't just about butterflies and easy moments. It was about the tough stuff too, the unknowns, the risks. A few days after that call, Liam invited me to the shop late one evening. He'd been working on a design, he said, something special he wanted to show me. When I got there, the place was mostly dark except for a single lamp casting a warm pool of light over a large sketch pad. He flipped it open, revealing a design that stopped me cold. A phoenix, wings spread wide, rising from ashes. "It's about new beginnings," he said softly. "About burning down what's old, to make room for something better. For growth." I stared at the intricate lines, the way the feathers seemed almost alive. It felt like he was telling me a story without words. And maybe, deep down, it was his story too. "Can I make this part of my next tattoo?" I asked, swallowing the lump in my throat. He nodded, eyes locking with mine. "I want to put it somewhere you can always see it." We sat there, side by side, the silence filled with something unspoken but understood. I felt this surge of hope mixed with fear, the kind that makes your heart race and your hands shake just a little. Because here we were, two guys trying to build something real, knowing it wouldn't be perfect, but willing to try anyway. Over the next few weeks, our relationship deepened. We shared dinners, lazy Sunday mornings, arguments that ended in apologies and laughter. We met each other's friends, navigated the awkwardness of first introductions, and slowly started blending our lives. One night, after a long day at the shop, Liam came over to my place. We were cooking dinner, him chopping vegetables, me stirring a pot of pasta, and the way he moved around my small kitchen felt like a dance we were learning together. "Have you thought about what you want to do with that phoenix tattoo?" he asked, glancing up. I smiled. "I want it on my chest, over my heart." He paused, then wiped his hands and reached out, cupping my face gently. "Then that's where it will go." That moment felt like a promise. Not just about ink on skin, but about us. about holding each other through whatever came next. A few days later, as Liam prepared his equipment for the tattoo session, I realized something else. This wasn't just about covering up old mistakes or marking new beginnings. It was about trust. About letting someone touch the parts of you that are scared and fragile, and knowing they'll handle them with care. When the needle buzzed to life and his hands traced the design onto my chest, I closed my eyes and let myself believe that sometimes the hands that ink your skin are the same ones that can help heal your soul. And maybe, just maybe, that was the kind of love worth taking a chance on. The day I finally got the Phoenix tattoo, I was nervous in a way that surprised me. Not the usual jitters from the needle. That part felt familiar, but the weight of what it symbolized. Liam's hands would be the ones drawing that story on my chest, and in some weird way, it felt vulnerable, like I was letting him in deeper than ever before. We met at the shop in the early afternoon. Liam was already setting up, the room filled with that familiar mix of ink, clean plastic, and faint coffee aroma from the corner machine. He looked calm, but I could see the slight tension in his jaw. Maybe he felt the gravity of the moment too. "Ready?" he asked, glancing up with a small smile. I nodded, took a deep breath, and settled back into the chair. As he began, the buzzing started, and with it the sensation of the needle tracing the phoenix's wings across my skin. Every line felt deliberate, every stroke a kind of conversation between us. We didn't talk much. There wasn't really a need. His hands moved with that steady confidence I'd come to trust, and I focused on the way the pain mixed with anticipation, the kind that made my chest feel both heavy and light at the same time. At one point, he paused, looking up at me. "You good?" I smiled through the sting. Better than good. When he finally finished, the piece was breathtaking. The phoenix looked alive, wings spread wide, feathers flowing across my chest. It was more than just art. It was a declaration. Liam cleaned the area and wrapped it carefully, then met my eyes. "You okay?" I nodded, heart still racing. "Yeah, I feel different, like somehow lighter." He grinned, relief washing over his face. "Good, because this is the start of something." That night, we went out for dinner, celebrating the new ink and the new chapter it marked. Over plates of comfort food and a couple of beers, we talked about everything, from his plans for the studio to my hesitant dreams about what I wanted in life. There was a moment when his hand found mine across the table, fingers lacing together naturally. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, just quiet and real. I squeezed his hand and realized that the real tattoo wasn't on my skin. It was in this connection that we were building, line by line. But as with everything worth having, challenges came knocking soon enough. One evening, Liam got a call that shifted the mood. His potential landlord had offered him a lease on a small space downtown, a prime spot for the studio. It was everything he'd hoped for, but with a catch. It came with a tight timeline and a mountain of expenses. He told me all this over the phone, voice tight but excited. It's a huge step, but it's also terrifying. I could tell he was trying to sound optimistic, but the stress was there. "I'm proud of you," I said, "and I'm here for whatever you need." He paused, then said quietly, "I don't want this to mess with us." That hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't been thinking about how his plans might affect what we had. For the first time, the weight of reality settled between us like an uninvited guest. We tried to keep things normal, but the pressure was looming. Late nights working on business plans, packing up equipment, meeting with suppliers. It was a lot, and I noticed Liam getting more withdrawn, exhaustion creeping into his eyes. One night, he showed up at my door, looking worn out but forcing a smile. "Can I crash here? I just need a break." I welcomed him in without hesitation. We spent the night on my couch, talking into the early hours, sharing fears and hopes. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Scared I'm going to lose myself in all this." I reached for his hand. "You won't, and you're not alone." That vulnerability deepened something between us. It wasn't just about love anymore. It was about partnership, about standing together when life got messy. Eventually, Liam opened the studio. The grand opening was a small gathering, friends, family, a few regular clients. Watching him work this space, seeing his dream come to life, made my chest ache with pride. Afterward, we celebrated quietly at his apartment. Sitting close, I traced the edges of the phoenix tattoo, feeling the slight tenderness as it healed. "Thank you," he said softly, "for believing in me, in us." I smiled, leaning in to kiss him. "Thank you for letting me be part of your story." In that moment, I realized that love isn't just about the easy days or the perfect moments. It's about showing up, again and again, even when things are hard, even when the future is uncertain. And with Liam, I was ready to show up for all of it. Months passed since the studio's opening, and though the initial whirlwind had settled, the real work was just beginning, both for Liam and for us. Business was steady, the kind of momentum that felt earned, not lucky. And our relationship had grown into this quiet, comfortable space where we could be messy, honest, and still feel safe. One evening, we found ourselves back at the tattoo shop. His shop now, the place where it all started. The sun was setting outside, casting long shadows across the floor. Liam was cleaning his station, and I was sitting nearby, watching him with that familiar mix of admiration and something deeper I wasn't always great at naming. He looked up, catching my gaze, and for a moment, there was silence, a pause filled with everything we'd been through. "You know," he said softly, "when we first met, I never expected this." "Neither did I admitted with a small laugh. He set down his tools and came over, sitting beside me. His hand found mine, fingers intertwining like they always did. "I'm glad we took the chance, even when it was scary." "Me too," I said. "You've changed everything. Not just my skin, but my life." He smiled, that warm, genuine smile that made me feel seen in a way I'd never thought possible. "You're my favorite story." I squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of those words, simple but profound. As night settled in, we stepped outside together. The city was quiet, the kind of calm that feels like a gift after all the noise of the day. Liam pulled me close, his arms steady around me, and I rested my head on his shoulder. In that moment, I realized that love isn't about perfect timing or grand declarations. It's about the everyday, the shared coffee, the quiet talks, the steady presence of someone who chooses you over and over. Liam's hands had drawn a phoenix on my chest, a symbol of rising and renewal. But what mattered most was what we were building together, a life marked not just by ink, but by trust, courage, and a love that felt like home. And as we stood there, under the city lights, I knew that this was just the beginning of our story, one I was ready to live, one steady, messy, beautiful moment at a time.